Welcome back to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay in Washington. And joining us again from Amherst, Massachusetts, from the Perry Institute studio, is Gerard Duminel. He's an economist at the University of Paris. He's the author of an upcoming book, The Crisis of Neoliberalism, From Subprime Crash to the Great Contraction. Thanks for joining us again, Gerard.
Thank you.
This word neoliberalism, which is in the title of your book and used by many economists many times, often doesn't get explained. So start from the beginning so we can get to the current crisis. What do you mean when you say neoliberalism?
When we speak of neoliberalism, we speak of contemporary capitalism. Okay? Neoliberalism is a new stage of capitalism which began around 1980. Okay? It began in big countries like United Kingdom and the United States. Then it was implemented in Europe and later in Japan and later around the world in general. So this is a new phase of capitalism. The characteristic of this phase of capitalism is a specific violence. The objective, was to restore and increase tremendously the income of the upper fraction, of the population. This was done by imposing a new discipline to workers, cutting the progress of purchasing power. It was done through neoliberal globalization, which means free trade, free movement of capital around the world. It was done by new economic policies.
Why were they able to implement this at that time? I mean, one must assume that the upper echelons, the upper 5% or 1-2%,
yes.
I mean, they always want to maximize how much they can make. So what was specific about that period?
Because, after the Great Depression, after World War II, during the first decades after the war, the political situation was completely different. In the world, there was a very important movement of class struggle. There was a worker resistance, not only but in the United States, but around the world in general. So actually, capitalist classes were forced to compromise. But the point is that in the 1970s, there was a big structural crisis in the world, in particular in those countries with cumulative inflation and so on. And there was a new phase of struggle, new phase of confrontation. And there was so capitalist classes were moving forward, and tried to implement this new social order, which would be more favorable to their interest. Okay? There was a very big resistance on the part of workers with big strikes in England, big strike in the United States. It was the period in England of Margaret Thatcher, period of Reagan, and so on. And actually, this was a new episode of class struggle in which popular classes lost, and capitalist classes and upper classes in general won. Okay? But they were able to impose this new social order.
Now, a lot of that had to do with the industrialization and the raising of skill sets in countries with much cheaper labor. Was that not a major factor in
Yes, that's the reason why I mentioned, among the methods of neoliberalism, I mentioned globalization, neoliberal globalization. Neoliberal globalization means opening, frontiers to trade and to the movement of capital, which means the capability to invest anywhere in the world. So this is exactly what's happening now. I mean, if you compare wages in countries like China, or even worse, if you compare wages in the US and wages in Vietnam, for example, in Vietnam, a worker in a factory will make $50. A worker in Guatemala, a woman working in what we call the maquiladora, in Guatemala or in other countries of Latin America, will make $50 a month. So of course, neoliberalism placed all workers of the world in a situation of competition, and this had, of course, an effect, very strong effect on their capability to control wages, purchasing power, and any kind of social protection in the sense of health, unemployment benefits or anything. But neoliberalism is not only neoliberal globalization. It's also, for example, a new way of managing corporations. Now in neoliberalism, corporations are managed with only one objective, in particular in the United States, which is maximizing the value of the share on the stock market. This is called, create value for stockholders. And if you look at the data, you find that they were very successful because indeed, to the present crisis, the stock market indices increased tremendously. Distribution of dividend to shareholders, increased tremendously.
This has a lot to do with creating various bubbles.
Yes, of course, neoliberalism, one aspect of neoliberalism that we have not mentioned, which is crucial in the present crisis what we call financialization. And this means, developing financial mechanisms because they are making, of course, a lot of money on that. But the condition for that was deregulation, because the activity of the financial sector was limited by many regulations, often inherited from the Great Depression. Okay? So gradually they were eroding that, but it's a constant process. And to the present crisis, it went growing. If you look, for example, the year 2000, really marks a limit. After 2000, all these mechanisms, like financial mechanism, develop an absolutely incredible speed. If you look at the data, you see after 2000 an incredible explosion of financial mechanism. And this was one of the causes of the present crisis, for which now workers are paying, like in Greece.
Over this period, you have a massive transfer of wealth from the majority of people to this top 2-3 percentile.
Oh yes, yes. Our in-income statement, data disappear, and this is absolutely tremendous mechanism. It's called, in the press, the growth of inequality. Okay, and but actually it's a class phenomenon. And the answer to that by the right is, well, inequalities are growing, but everybody is benefiting, which is total bullshit, if I can say.
Yes, you can.
In France, we are gross, and we constantly say this sort of words, so...
Yeah, this word's completely unknown in English, particularly when you're talking about politics and economics. We wouldn't consider saying something like that. So if we look at the title of your book, this massive transfer of wealth and this period of neoliberalism leads to crash. It leads to the subprime crash. It leads to the great contraction. So why does this neoliberal period lead to the crash?
I think there are two types of factors. One type of factor is more financialization, the development of financial mechanism to the limit. It is some kind of explosion, actually. Okay? This one group, and it's related to globalization, because a very important aspect of globalization is financial globalization. Okay? Because you cannot completely separate financial and non-financial mechanisms, because one important aspect of globalization was the globalization of financial mechanisms. So this is one strand of determinant. But there is another strand of determinant, extremely important, which are the disequilibria of the US economy. Okay? The disequilibria of the US economy, this means the deficit of trade of the US economy, which is related to globalization. The fact that the US economy is importing, buying from the rest of the world much more than they are selling to the rest of the world. And this is related to the growth of the debt of households in the country. Okay? This is related now to the debt of the government. Okay? So in the US economy, okay, a very important factor of the present crisis was the explosion of consumption, but not the consumption of everybody, the consumption, of the top percentage points, in the income pyramid.
Well, in the next segment of our interview, let's talk about what working people and ordinary people should be demanding from their politicians as a solution to all of this. Please join us for the next segment of our interview with Gérard Duminel.